What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode here, the Side Guys Football Forum. I'm one of your co-hosts on the side, joined as always by my good friend, my good buddy. Fortunately, still not joined by my good friend, my good buddy, Tad Desai. If you enjoyed our last episode right before the new year, well, Tad is not on this episode either. But in case you are missing him, you want to see that banter between the two of us, the camaraderie, the chemistry, whatever it is, he should be back on the episode by next week's episodes. But giving you another solo episode here in the new year in 2025, we want to give a little bit of a look ahead to what's coming ahead in 2025, while also sort of closing up some of the storylines here happening in 2024 when it comes to the NFL landscape, the NFL draft landscape, as well as fantasy football as well. So this is sort of like a hybrid episode of all three of those things, looking into some interesting situations as we get closer to the offseason, and of course, when we get to September and fantasy football and week one of the new NFL season. So coming up on the final weekend of football here in week 18 when it comes to the regular season, then we'll get some playoff action. So, I mean, guys, this is the perfect time to get involved with our good friends at Underdog Fantasy. I mean, you could be betting on the NFL playoffs. I know a lot of players have some NFL incentives in regards to their contracts. You could probably make some bets according to that here in week 18. Like I mentioned, the NFL playoffs will be starting right after that. We got the NBA season going strong. We'll have the MLB season having first pitch in just a couple of months here in 2025. You can bet on the NHL season. We'll be having college basketball, both the men's and the women's. So, guys, tons of things you can be betting on there. Why don't you get involved with our good friends at Underdog Fantasy and use our promo code DESAI, DESAI. You could double up on your initial deposit of $10 or more, up to $500, courtesy of our good friends at Underdog Fantasy. I mean, guys, it's very easy to use. You can use the website, very user-friendly, very easy to use there. You can also use the apps both on Apple and Android devices as well. Very user-friendly, very easy to use there as well. So take advantage of our offer, guys. That promo code, once again, is DESAI, DESAI. Double up on your initial deposit of $10 or more, up to $500, courtesy of our good friends at Underdog Fantasy. So, as mentioned, we're going to be diving into some interesting situations as we get into the 2025 season, the offseason, the NFL draft, fantasy football, as mentioned before. So we got a little bit of a hybrid here. So I'm going to dive into three distinct situations that I find the most intriguing, the most interesting as we're getting, into playoff time. And then obviously after that into the off season here, as far as how these things can affect how teams are going to look and how that'll affect your fantasy football seasons as we get, closer to the summer months. We'll get ready for start doing draft prep for fantasy football and all that stuff, guys. So first thing that I want to tackle here, the Minnesota Vikings quarterback situation. So things get interesting here for Minnesota because, after whenever their playoff run is done, because they still have week 18 left to go, they're playing for the number 1 seed, but at the very least, they'll be the number 5 seed in the NFC playoffs. Looking like a very strong team that could possibly make a deep run in the postseason here. But things, like I said, get very interesting for Minnesota because Sam Darnold, who's probably the front runner to win comeback player of the year in the NFL, he is set to hit free agency this offseason. Will be a prime target for a number of teams in case Minnesota doesn't want to resign, because you have to remember Minnesota signed into a 1-year deal as sort of like a stopgap in case, they couldn't figure out another quarterback to, whether they were going to draft one at the time or what they were going to do there. They moved on from Kirk Cousins, who signed in Atlanta, signed a big deal there. So yeah, we'll see exactly what's going to happen there. But yeah, you got teams like Las Vegas will be looking for a quarterback. Both the Jets and the Giants could be in the market for a new quarterback there. Who knows what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. clearly, Daniel Jones is no longer with the New York Giants. He's actually a member of the Minnesota Vikings. That is going to be very intriguing to see what happens with him there. But yeah, they are not set there with the Giants there with, Tommy DeVito and or Drew Lock. Drew Lock has looked good at times, but just whether he's the future, I don't know if they want to make that commitment. So he's definitely in consideration for those two teams. You got the Tennessee Titans with Will Levis. He's been good. He's been bad. I don't know if he's the long-term answer there as well. And then obviously you got the New Orleans Saints with Derek Carr. He's been dealing with a lot of injury. He has not been the guy. Our good friend Al Rowe, the podcast, he'll definitely tell you that he is not the answer anywhere. So yeah, there's a good chance Sam Darnold may be courted by the New Orleans Saints. But this is where it gets more interesting because, as mentioned, the Minnesota Vikings, they signed Sam Darnold in the offseason as he was their stopgap solution because they didn't know what was going to happen with Kirk Cousins. As mentioned, Kirk Cousins ended up moving on to the Atlanta Falcons. But this is where it gets more interesting because the Minnesota Vikings ended up drafting J.J. McCarthy out of the University of Michigan in the 2024 NFL Draft to be the feature of the offense. So you also have to remember that they were the number 11 overall pick. They moved up one spot with the New York Jets to number 10 to end up selecting him. So not only did they draft a rookie quarterback after they signed Sam Darnold, but they moved up one spot to then claim him as well as like, this is the guy that's going to be the future of the franchise. Now, heading into training camp, you had Sam Darnold. He was named the starter when training camp started. He was the de facto starter, though, because then J.J. McCarthy, after their preseason game against the Las Vegas Raiders, in practice, he ended up tearing his meniscus in his right knee during the preseason. His season was done after that. He didn't play a single down in the regular season and has been all Sam Darnold. And what did Sam Darnold do? He is having a career year with the Minnesota Vikings in his 7th NFL season and his 4th NFL team. So Darnold is currently ranked as your QB8 in PPR fantasy leagues. As mentioned, we still got one more week to go. He's currently 4th in the NFL in passing yards and 5th in passing touchdowns. And here's the crazy thing. Speaking of passing touchdowns, Darnold has thrown for 3 or more passing touchdowns only 10 times in his entire career. As mentioned, he's been playing in the NFL for 7 years now. This is his 4th team, and he's only had 10 games in his career where he's had 3 or more passing touchdowns. Of those 10 games in his career, 6 of them came just this season alone with the Minnesota Vikings. Excuse me. So that sort of tells you the fact that his resurgence with Minnesota is real. He was able to sort of make that, form work there with Kevin O'Connell, that sort of chemistry there. It vibed, having Justin Jefferson is not a bad thing as well either. So yeah, he has been looking sharp in Minnesota, looking very much like that number 3 overall pick from some years ago. So yeah, he's been having a fantastic year, but here's the thing that we need to look back with J.J. McCarthy. Now, we've seen some quarterbacks, they start their very first year in the league. You look at, Bryce Young with Carolina Panthers last year. You look at Anthony Richardson with Tad's Indianapolis Colts. You look at Kenny Pickett with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who is no longer a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then you also have to look at Sam Darnold himself because he was drafted by the New York Jets. Me and Tad have gone over this before, but he wasn't given the proper support there with either the offensive line or offensive weapons, both in the backfield as well as on the outside with some of those receivers. So that's part of the reason why they struggled and they had to move on, and teams were not patient enough and they had to move on to different teams. So as mentioned, that's why Sam Darnold's on his 14, but he's finding some success. But this is where, you wonder what Minnesota is going to do, because then you also see some teams that let the quarterback sit and develop behind stopgap solutions or veteran, presence there already. So you look at, Bryce Young just this season alone, he was benched for Andy Dalton. I know this is his second year, but, Andy Dalton came in, he looked a little bit better. Then obviously he looked a lot worse. They went back to Bryce Young, and you just look in that matter of a year and a half, you got that half year of just benching, no longer they had the pressure there. He just looked a lot more comfortable being the quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. And I think the Panthers may not have to worry so much about their quarterback going forward, because we saw enough from Bryce Young this year that, okay, there's the reason why we draft this guy number 1 overall. I think he's got the talent there. So you look at J.J. McCarthy, he's been sitting there this entire year developing, with Sam Darnold and Kevin O'Connell. And so their thought is that maybe when he comes to his second year, he'll be ready to go, because you look at guys like Patrick Mahomes, obviously is like a household name in the NFL now, but he sat behind Alex Smith his rookie year. He started those last couple of games at the very end there. Then obviously he took over the very next year when Alex Smith got traded to Washington, and the rest is history, as Patrick Mahomes is now, one of the, like I said, household names in the NFL. You also look at a name like Jordan Love in Green Bay, where he was drafted when Aaron Rodgers was still in his prime. There's a lot of just speculation as far as, is this the move that they're going to move off of Aaron Rodgers? But Aaron Rodgers was still playing at a very high level at the time. Jordan Love was a very questionable move. But yeah, now you look at this. He's a seasoned guy. He was able to develop under Aaron Rodgers, sitting in there in Matt LaFleur's system there. And yeah, he's definitely looking like a franchise quarterback for Green Bay, as to why they sort of paid him all that money as well. So that could be the case there with JJ McCarthy, as to, like, they got the stopgap solution with Sam Darnold. It's like, we appreciate everything you did for this year. We'll see what happens with them going in the postseason here. But just, yeah, maybe the future is still JJ McCarthy, and decide to go with him. So is it the smarter move to go with the original plan and move forward with the young McCarthy? Or is it better to go with the guy that has proven he can succeed in your system and hold off on giving the keys to McCarthy for maybe a few more years? Go that Jordan Love route, where it's like, Sam Darnold is working, you give him a small extension, maybe a 2 or 3 year deal, and then you let McCarthy develop further, and then eventually you let McCarthy take over when he's fully ready and he's fully succeeding in the system to become that guy for the Minnesota Vikings long term. Now, this is where it gets, where you want to analyze things a little bit further. So one thing to note with this whole situation is that Minnesota's defense has been playing a huge factor with them being in contention for that number 1 seed in the NFC playoffs. You look at defensive coordinator Brian Flores. I mean, he is being talked about getting another chance at being a head coach in the NFL. We'll see how this all plays out, because, I mean, will teams like sort of overlook, some of the stories that we've been hearing during his time when he was head coach of the Miami Dolphins? We heard Tua Tagovailoa on a podcast say about his demeaning nature, and just he's being very negative with some of the players, including himself. And then, of course, you have to remember that he filed a lawsuit against the NFL due to racial discrimination. So you wonder, just, is all that going to go under the rug? Are teams just going to look past that? Is this like that, the flex tape meme, where it's like you got that leaky bucket, and just, the fact that the Minnesota Vikings are winning, you slap that flex tape on it, everybody's just going to overlook that he's finding success there. So, I mean, that could be very much the case. But if he stays or if he goes, this defense has been playing at a very elite level. So it's just like, you wonder whether that can sustain success, because you look at just the Cleveland Browns from last year to this year. Now, I know it's the Cleveland Browns. They've been mired by, very poor success over the last couple of years. But you look at last year, they were one of the most talked about teams in the NFL because their defense was playing at such a high level. The Browns last year were allowed the fewest total yards in the NFL, and they were tied for the 5th most turnovers forced on defense. They ended up going 11-6, and they made the playoffs as a 5 seed. Now, less can be said about that appearance in the playoffs. They absolutely got stomped by the Houston Texans, but the fact that they were able to have such a successful season in 1 year there, that sort of speaks to the volumes of how good that defense is. Shift to this year with the Cleveland Browns. It's been the absolute opposite, because we have the Cleveland Browns there. They have allowed the 16th most total yards in the league. They have forced a total of 12 turnovers, which is tied for the 2nd fewest in the NFL. And they're currently sitting at 3-13, and they hold the 3rd overall pick in the NFL draft. But that could definitely shake things as we go into week 18. But looking like they're in play for a top 5 pick again, after having such a successful season last year. So it's very interesting. Don't know if you can rely on that defense year to year. We'll see how things adjust as far as how they go into next year, if that defense can still play at a high level. But look, you could sit here, you could argue with me, be like, okay, maybe they don't need the elite defense. They have Justin Jefferson, arguably the best receiver in the league. They got Jordan Addison, a very good complementary piece to him. They traded for a TJ Hawkinson a while back, so he's a great piece to add to that offense there. So they can throw the ball, they'll be fine. Aaron Jones wants to return, so you got his steady play. Maybe they'll draft somebody, so it's like they're going to be fine on offense. That offensive line's been holding up pretty well, so maybe Sam Darnold could replicate this. So it's like everything is in play for there. But now let's go back a couple years and look at another guy who had a resurgent year with the new team. Also struggled with the New York Jets as well. Geno Smith. Let's go back to 2022 with the Seattle Seahawks. So after a very tumultuous career, Smith landed with the Seattle Seahawks in 2022, won the Comeback Player of the Year award. He threw for over 4,000 passing yards, which was the 8th most in the NFL, and had 30 passing touchdowns, which is the 4th most in the NFL. After that career year, Smith followed up by only throwing for 3,624 passing yards the next year, and also had only 20 passing touchdowns. Currently, this year, with one game left to go, Smith is sitting at 4,097 passing yards, 17 passing touchdowns, but his interception number, my goodness, it is at 15 right now. So, I mean, he's been steadily taking a step back each and every year since that very, great career year that he had with Seattle back in 2022. I don't know whether Minnesota can sustain success. So you wonder whether it's better to sort of go with that young option, go through the growing pains there, because there's a reason why you moved up to get that guy. You got to see what you have with him. Or, like I said, you go with what you believe in, you go with what you've seen. He's been there, he's done it. The players are fighting for him. They love him. They love playing for him. So it's like you give him an extension and you see whether he can sort of replicate that success and be the guy for you going forward for at least maybe a couple more years until you're ready to finally make sure that JJ McCarthy is the guy to lead your franchise going into next year. So this is a very interesting situation because I don't know whether Sam Darnold is going to be chasing his money. He's going to want to look elsewhere in case there's another team out there that wants to give him a lot of money. Minnesota can use the franchise tag on him, and so he'll have to come back and play under, I think it's like a $41 million cap hit there if he plays under the franchise tag, which is not a bad chunk of change if you want to play for one more year in Minnesota where you found success and everybody loves you there. But yeah, I wonder just what's going to happen as far as whether they decide to go with the young guy, JJ McCarthy, and really just turn it over to him, which seemed like it was the original plan, or go with this sort of like, the curveball that sort of came here that sort of worked in their favor, that, sort of hung in the, air there where you're just able to take it for a ride. And just, yeah, he's been absolutely looking like the guy that could lead this team to another postseason next year and maybe another one the following year. But just you wonder about the defense. You wonder just whether they could sustain success year over year. Same thing with Sam Darnold itself. Did he just capture lightning in a bottle, or is this the real deal that we're finally seeing now in his 7th year? All that experience is sort of coming together here with Minnesota. So very interesting to see what happens there with Minnesota Vikings, whether it's JJ McCarthy, whether it's Sam Darnold. Very interesting to see as far as how they approach the offseason, how they approach the NFL draft, and of course, how that will affect your fantasy football situation heading into 2025. Now, let's shift to America's team. Let's go to the Dallas Cowboys. And I want to talk specifically about their running back situation here. So you look at what they did last year in the offseason. The Dallas Cowboys let Tony Pollard walk in free agency, and then they doubled down by not drafting a running back with any of their 8 draft picks in the draft. They felt confident about Rico Dowdle, who will start on the roster, and then they ended up re-signing the 29-year-old Ezekiel Elliott after they let him walk free agency. They released him to go sign with the New England Patriots, and just, that did not work out as well because talk about plans backfiring, because this is the ultimate backfire, because the Dallas Cowboys had one of the league's worst rushing offenses. They ranked dead last in rushing touchdowns. They had the 6th fewest rushing yards, and they are 8th in the NFL in fewest rushing attempts. Now, obviously, they still have one more week to go, but I don't think those numbers are going to get that much better. Like, they were absolutely putrid when it came to running the ball. So heading into the offseason, you expect the running back to be a priority, considering his offense took a big hit because Dak Prescott got hurt, was out for the rest of the year. They couldn't air it out, relying on Dak Prescott's arm there. They probably anticipated doing that with CeeDee Lamb and some of the weapons that they have there. So they probably weren't as concerned about the running game at the time. Ezekiel Elliott was cut before week 18, so he could possibly latch on with a Super Bowl contender. And Rico Dowdle is going to be a free agent here in 2025. Deuce Vaughn is currently the only running back on the roster to come back in the offseason. Like, he is the only player that is going to be on the roster for the Dallas Cowboys at the running back position. So, I mean, this is going to be a very interesting situation for the Dallas Cowboys to see how they attack free agency, whether it's going to be through the draft, because you look at the free agency running back class, there's a lot of great names out there. You got my guy. I'm hoping they can land in a better situation because for some reason Denver hates him. Javonte Williams is a free agent. You got Nick Chubb, maybe landing in a new place, not having to be mired by Cleveland, but that he seems like a guy that maybe wants to finish his career in Cleveland, no matter how bad it is there. So Nick Chubb is still a free agent though. You got Aaron Jones. He's talked about possibly playing with the Minnesota Vikings again. He likes the chemistry there, but he's also a Texas guy, formerly of University of Texas El Paso. That's where he was drafted out of. So maybe he wants to play for the hometown team there in the Dallas Cowboys. You got Najee Harris. I mean, he's been looking good at times, looking not good at times there in Pittsburgh. Maybe he needs a change of scenery. He's a guy who could take a lot of carries as well. So Dallas could definitely use him as a workhorse running back. J.K. Dobbins, this was my guy into the offseason. I really had all my chips on him. He was a very fantastic player. Fortunately, he did get hurt again, but he had that resurgent year a lot of people were thinking about when he had his rookie year all the way back with the Baltimore Ravens. So, I mean, he still has that potential, just whether that health factor is going to play a factor there. And then you look at a guy like A.J. Dillon, who's been a backup in Green Bay for a long time. He unfortunately suffered a season-ending injury with the back at the beginning of the season, so he didn't play it down this entire season. So he's going to be fresh. He's going to be good. Maybe it's sort of like a Michael Turner situation where it's like he was the backup in the Chargers for a long time, went to Atlanta, became a workhorse running back, and he became a household name for fantasy managers and the Atlanta Falcons for years to come. So, I mean, that could be a very similar situation there with A.J. Dillon. Here's the prevailing thought that a lot of people have with the Dallas Cowboys is that they're going to use their first round pick, which is currently the number 13 overall pick, on a running back, specifically Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. Now, this would make the most sense because Jeanty was easily the most dominating running back in the college football landscape this past year. And, you know, I really don't care about Travis Hunter, but he was arguably the best player overall in college football this past season. He was definitely a huge Heisman snub over Travis Hunter for sure. So, yeah, we'll see what happens there as far as, you know, whether he's going to be drafted in the first round. But for me, the Dallas Cowboys have way bigger issues than the running back position. I think, you know, going with Ashton Jeanty is definitely a splash move. It's going to put a lot more seats. It's going to sell a lot more tickets. It's going to put a lot more seats in their crumbling stadium that is AT&T Stadium. But I think Dallas has issues on defense. They need some more weapons on the outside to give CeeDee Lamb some help. Their offensive line could definitely use some upgrades. I mean, just they have lots of other issues. I really don't doubt that Micah Parsons is no longer going to be a Dallas Cowboy. He's probably going to walk in free agency. So he definitely could use some pass rush help for sure. But just, yeah, across the board, they have other issues to address besides running back. And so spending that first round pick somewhere else would probably make a lot more sense. Heading into the offseason, the Dallas Cowboys don't have a ton of money when it comes to the cap space either. They are projected to have just a shade under $20 million in spending money this season. Things also get very interesting for the Dallas Cowboys because Mike McCarthy's contract is about to expire once we hit January. But even if it wasn't set to expire, I wonder if the Dallas Cowboys were considering moving on from him. You wonder whether he gets a saving grace because Dak Prescott got hurt this season, but it still didn't make things a lot better. You have to just wonder whether it's just his old school methods and just everything just wasn't working in Dallas. And here's something I want to throw out there, especially with Black Monday looming right around the corner here. Everyone's sort of projecting, especially after the Detroit Lions humiliated the Chicago Bears just a couple of weeks ago, that Ben Johnson was auditioning for that job to, you know, really help develop Caleb Williams and really just turn things around in the Chicago Bears. But Jerry Jones would seriously be stupid to not back up the Brinks truck to bring Johnson to Dallas to sort of reinvigorate this offense. He's already got an established quarterback in Dak Prescott. He's got a great weapon in CeeDee Lamb. You definitely make a few more upgrades on the offensive line, but it's still pretty good. Maybe it's not as good as Detroit's offensive line, but they still got a pretty good offensive line there. You definitely need to just shore up that running back game there, but I think he could do a lot with that offense and really turn that franchise around a lot quicker than I think with Chicago, which I think has a little bit more issues than the Dallas Cowboys for sure. So we'll see how it all plays out as far as how many interviews he's going to be taking, which interviews he'll be taking specifically as far as whether Mike McCarthy will have a job with the Dallas Cowboys or whether he won't. So we'll see about that. But let's just jump back to the running back situation because I think it would be smart for the Dallas Cowboys. And like I said, I think it would be smart. Who knows what Jerry Jones is going to do because, yeah, that man just tries to do anything that he wants to. Saying that he's all in, but then, yeah, signing the likes of Ezekiel Elliott to 29-year-old Ezekiel Elliott as the, I don't know, not the definition of all in for me. Dallas, I think, would be smart to re-sign Rico Dowdle. I think you get him at a low-cost offer because he's probably not going to be a highly targeted running back when you get to free agency. But I think the biggest thing for Dowdle was that when Dallas decided to commit to Dowdle to be the lead running back, they weren't hemming and hawing. They weren't, rotating between him and Ezekiel Elliott. He became a very dominant piece of that running game. And that offense started to find a lot of balance, even with Cooper Rush at quarterback, because in the 6 games where Dowdle got 18 or more rushing attempts this season, the Cowboys went 4-2, and Dowdle had over 85 rushing yards in all 6 of those games. So pretty much where the Cowboys committed to giving him the ball more, the offense got better. It's just plain and simple. They played a lot better. They looked a lot more balanced. He was able to sort of keep the defense from guessing, from stopping just the pass. They had to worry about Dowdle as well. So I think getting him back on a low-cost deal, I think that's a smarter move. Like I said, Jeanty would be a fantastic move in the first round. He's definitely going to add a lot of, spark there. A lot of people are going to be interested. I mean, he had just an amazing season at Boise State, going to be a very dominant piece when he gets to the NFL as well. But I think they just need some other help. Like I talked about, they could use some pass rush help. They need some wide receiver help. They could use some offensive line help. So, I mean, you look at guys in the first round there, you got Luther Burden the third. He didn't have the greatest season, but I think he's still going to be a very good piece at the next level at the wide receiver position. You got James Pierce and Nick Scorton, the defensive edge, the edge rushers there. They could be good pieces to replace Micah Parsons or add on to Micah Parsons in case you do decide to resign him. Then you look at the offensive line. You got Josh Simmons out of Ohio State and Arante Ursary. Still got some time to practice that one, but I think I said that one right. Arante Ursary out of Iowa State. I mean, that's a guy that could possibly be a very good piece as well on the offensive line. So I think they are better addressing other needs instead of the running back position at that number 13 overall pick. Maybe it's a little bit fluid there, 14, 15, maybe it's even 12. We'll see about that. But I think they got other needs to address instead of the running back position there. So, I mean, biggest takeaway, I think, here is that Dallas found success when they were able to get balance. They were able to get good running game there. If they end up taking Jeanty, he'll be a borderline first-round pick. I think if they stick with Dowdle, though, I think they can get a very good backup running back later in the draft. I really like this year's draft class. You got Omarion Hampton, you got Ollie Gordon, you got Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. I mean, there's a lot of great guys that are coming in to the draft class this year that I think could be good steals in mid-rounds. But let's look at this in a fantasy perspective. So if Jeanty ends up being taken with a first-round pick, I think he's a lot of people. I think he's going to be a borderline first-round pick for a lot of people when it comes to fantasy football drafts, because you have to believe that he's going to replicate things that what Ezekiel Elliott was doing when he was first drafted out of Ohio State to join this Dallas Cowboys backfield. I think he'll be that type of player. He'll definitely get the touches. He's going to be a workhorse running back, both in the run game, both in the pass game. He'll be that type of borderline first-round pick that I think in fantasy drafts, a lot of people will be very happy if they can land him. But if the Dallas Cowboys decide to go with Rico Dowdle, he's going to be a mid-round steal for me, because I think, like I said, if he gets more carries in this offense, they relied on him more. He's familiar with this offense now. That may change if they decide to go with somebody besides Mike McCarthy, but I still think he has the talent in that offense there with the guys around him that I think he could be a mid-round steal in 2025 NFL drafts. But like I said, this all goes according to plan, if they make him the lead back. But yeah, if they decide to hedge their bets and, like I said, draft somebody else, sign somebody in free agency to sort of split reps with him, then that will definitely hurt his stock as well. He'll probably slide into double-digit rounds until they decide to fully commit to a running back. It's hard to trust that backfield for sure. But if Jeanty ends up in Dallas, he's definitely going to be a home run pick in all fantasy football drafts for sure. But yeah, if they decide to go with Dowdle and maybe a backup guy, I like Dowdle a lot. I think he could be a legit running back 2 for sure, maybe a running back 1, depending on the talent that he gets there as far as the coaching staff, whether it's Mike McCarthy, whether it's somebody else. We'll see about that. But very interesting to see how Dallas will approach their offseason, as well as free agency, as well as the NFL draft, because that could change quite a bit based on the coaching staff to the running back situation. We already know Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb are locked in, but if they add other pieces to the wide receiver room, that will definitely affect a lot of things when it comes to competing in the NFL, as well as how you will attack your fantasy football drafts in 2025. So, gotta take a quick water break. Something I'm learning from the last episode here. Talking for 40 minutes straight on your own is definitely a big difference than talking with somebody else. But yeah, definitely want to make sure I got a good voice for you as we sort of close out here. One final situation that I want to look at is the Washington Commanders wide receiver situation. Now, this is actually very peculiar here, because you look at the Washington Commanders. with the exception of Terry McLaurin and Luke McCaffrey, the entire Commanders wide receiver room will be free agents this year. Also, you have to add to the fact that Zach Ertz, who is currently second on the team in all Washington Commanders receiving categories, he is also going to be a free agent as well. So this is, just to further add on to here, the situation gets more intriguing because Kliff Kingsbury, based on this, how well he did with Jayden Daniels and that offense there in Washington, he may strike while the iron is hot and nab one of those open head coaching vacancies. We talked about Ben Johnson maybe going to Chicago. Kliff Kingsbury coached Caleb Williams back at USC when he was an assistant under Lincoln Riley. So, I mean, there's a good chance that maybe he's in contention for the Chicago Bears coaching staff job there to possibly develop Caleb Williams further and really just give him a sense of familiarity, give him things that he knows that he could do well, and really find a lot of success there possibly. So we'll see what happens with Kliff Kingsbury. But yeah, if he decides to leave too, this will definitely change a lot of things when it comes to Washington Commanders. So if he leaves or even if he stays, you just have to wonder whether the Commanders will continue to operate this offense with Jayden Daniels being a dual threat player. Now, it would make the most sense to keep him as a dual threat option, but you also don't want to risk hurting the future of the franchise as well. We kind of went through this already with Washington when they did this with Robert Griffin III. Had a fantastic rookie year. They ended up forcing him to play on sort of a gimpy leg. He ended up hurting himself. He was not the same guy. His career definitely went down the tubes very quickly based on pursuit and having to use him when probably they could have gotten Kirk Cousins a little bit sooner. I don't know, but just, that they don't want to go back and relive that same exact horrific thing that mired their franchise for a long time until now they got Jayden Daniels. So we'll see how they decide to operate that. But like I talked about, I want to talk about the wide receiver room because this is where it gets very, historic, because you look at past history as far as offenses with dual threat quarterbacks, they flowed through the best receiver, the best options that the dual threat quarterback had in their offense was their primary receiver and their tight end. I got a few options here as far as examples, to sort of back up my point here. So you look at Lamar Jackson, relies on Mark Andrews. I know a lot of people talked about how terrible a season he had to start the season, but down the stretch, there was a streak where he had a touchdown in practically every game, became a more reliable part of that offense. You look at early in his career, Lamar Jackson was looking Mark Andrews' way quite a bit. Then you have to remember that he had the likes of Steve Smith in his offense. He had Anquan Bolden in his offense, and now he has Zay Flowers. So he's relying on those two guys mainly when it comes to moving the ball down the field, when it comes to the passing offense. Let's go back a little further. Let's go to Cam Newton with the Carolina Panthers. During his glory days, he relied on Greg Olsen at his tight end position. Then you also have to remember that even though Steve Smith played the Baltimore Ravens, he started his career with the Carolina Panthers. He's a very dominating force there with Cam Newton. Once Steve Smith did sign the Baltimore Ravens, we had that one fluky year with Kelvin Benjamin, but we had a lot of Greg Olsen for sure. So relying on that primary receiver and the tight end. Let's go back a little bit further than that. Let's go to Michael Vick during his days with the Atlanta Falcons. He relied on the likes of Algie Crumpler, one of my favorite NFL names, but a very good player at the time too, and Brian Finneran at the wide receiver position. So relied on both of those guys majority of the time when it came to moving the ball down the field there. Let's go back even further than that. Let's go to Randall Cunningham with the Philadelphia Eagles. He relied on tight end Keith Jackson and wide receiver Chris Carter. When the Eagles released Chris Carter because of his behavioral issues, it became Calvin Williams. But pretty much what this tells me is that if you want to keep your quarterback as a dual threat option, you got your primary receiver and you got your tight end. Those are the two guys that you want to lock in to make sure that you have solid pieces, because that is who your quarterback is looking at the most for sure. So the point is here is that the Commanders had their primary receiver at Terry McLaurin. He's locked up for the next couple of years. There's a good chance that they may sign some of the free agents that they have. You have to look at Olamide Zaccheaus. He's been having a great couple of weeks. Jameson Crowder is a veteran option that they have. We have Noah Brown. We had Diami Brown. They both scored a couple of times during the course of the season. So some of those guys may come back on cheaper deals to be supplementary pieces to Terry McLaurin. The thing that I wonder the most, though, is then also the tight end position. Because like I mentioned, Zach Ertz, he's getting up there in years. You wonder whether they decide to bring him back in the fold. He was there with Kliff Kingsbury during his time in Arizona. He's a very dependable piece. Like I said, second in all receiving categories for the Washington Commanders behind Terry McLaurin for most of the part. But you also have to look that they drafted a young tight end out of Kansas State, Ben Sinnott, who could possibly be the next step for the Washington Commanders if he continues to develop. Because, I mean, he showed a lot of promise during the draft process coming out of Kansas State. And so you look at his past rookie year, Sinnott wasn't used all that much. Maybe he's developing. I brought this up many times before on the podcast. I think tight ends is one of those positions that takes the longest to adjust to the NFL. You have some exceptions to the rule. You obviously got your Brock Bowers. You got your Sam Laporta last year. But yeah, I think Sinnott is a guy that can continue to develop and maybe going into the second year next year can take over that lead role and be a promising piece of this offense, be a very key contributor for Jayden Daniels as a go-to option for him. But you also have to look that there's some good names on the free agency market when it comes to the wide receiver room there. So you got guys like Chris Godwin is set to be a free agent. You got T. Higgins set to become a free agent. Keenan Allen's a solid veteran option. Amari Cooper is going to be a free agent. Then you also got Stephon Diggs slated to hit free agency as well. So you got a lot of great pieces there that in case you don't want to go with the tight end position, maybe shore up the receiver position. Then you start to use Jayden Daniels more as a passer, and then he'll only have to use his legs to sort of get himself out of trouble instead of going to that as sort of a, primary sort of force of moving the ball down the field instead of, relying on his arm, relying more on his legs. Look at the tight end class, not that great. So maybe it would make sense for Washington to bring back Zach Ertz if he wants to come back. He leads the class. Probably Mike Gesicki would be second on that list. Other than that, you got a lot of just questionable names. I don't know if I like a lot of those guys, but in case Ben Sinnott isn't the answer as far as being a young tight end, he's just not developing the way they want. The rookie tight end class has some promising pieces. You got Colson Loveland out of Michigan. You got Tyler Warren, had a fantastic game in the bowl game there. Tyler out of Penn State. And then Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. I think he's a very great receiving option. He could be a very interesting piece to fit into the Washington Commanders offense with Jayden Daniels and Terry McLaurin there. But I think just the point is here is just, if we are looking at this offense to be more that dual threat option, they like to go for the fences. We just have to see whether they want to operate the way that we've seen it before, where it's like you got that primary option, you got a tight end, everybody else are just supplemental pieces. So it's just, I'm wondering whether they decide to stick with that or will they swing for the fences? And, they got the new ownership there. They want to bring home, some championships and be competitive for years to come. Maybe they swing for the fences, that they add one of those big names that I mentioned before. This would also signal that they want Daniels to sort of air it out more and they only scramble, as mentioned, to only just get out of trouble and sort of like kind of the things that we saw with Deshaun Watson back when he was in Houston, not the Cleveland Deshaun Watson, but the Houston Texans version of Deshaun Watson, where he said himself, he's like, my goal is to make plays out of the pocket and just only when I need to sort of escape and make a play with my legs, then I will do that. But it's not going to be the primary source of my offensive ability. So heading into 2025, I think Daniels' value, I think just adjusts based on how Washington attacks both free agency as well as the NFL draft. If they decide that they want to keep the same process where it's like they want to lock in a tight end, lock in a primary receiver, we're going to see the same Daniels that we saw this year in his rookie year just go into his next year. And so if that's the case, then he's going to be drafted as top 5 quarterbacks. I mean, this guy has the talent. He's very good, just being a very gifted runner as well as a passer. We had a lot of great, fantastic finishes with the Washington Commanders specifically during his time there. We got that Hail Mary. I mean, just there's a lot of things that we liked with Jayden Daniels there. Terry McLaurin, I think for sure becomes a guy that you want to start targeting. He had his first double-digit touchdown season this year with Jayden Daniels. So that sort of tells you something as far as my theory that's just like, not even just theory. Like I said, I've given you examples as far as dual threat quarterbacks and who they rely on in the passing offense. So yeah, I think Terry McLaurin definitely sees a rise in his fantasy stock. You got Zach Ertz was top 10 among all tight ends in every receiving category. But depending on if he walks or if he stays, that's definitely going to affect his fantasy stock. Because if he walks, that'll take a tumble. If he stays, I like it to stay the same. I think he's a guy that could be drafted towards the end because I think a lot of guys will not be prioritizing Zach Ertz. But he's a guy that could definitely give you good value because Jayden Daniels was looking his way a lot towards the end of the season. And I think that could continue heading into next year. But if Ertz doesn't resign, decides to retire, whatever it is, Ben Sinnott could see a rise in his fantasy stock and will be a sleeper heading into 2025, depending on how he develops. And just, yeah, like I said, Jayden Daniels, I think his fantasy stock is definitely going to soar regardless of whether they keep him as a quarterback or whether they want to use him as the dual threat option. He is currently your QB6 when it comes to PPR leagues right now. So, I mean, yeah, this guy has been having a fantastic rookie season. You wonder whether he can capitalize on that as well because we saw guys like CJ Stroud last year that had a fantastic season. This year, I don't know what happened, just not looking like the same guy. But I think with Daniels, maybe we have a little bit more assurance because of that rushing ability, which CJ Stroud was not bringing to the table this year. I think Daniels, with that rushing ability, he still holds a lot of value in fantasy leagues next year, regardless of how the offense will look with, additions to the wide receiver room, changes to the tight end position, changes that offensive coaching staff as well, whether Kliff Kingsbury stays or whether he goes. I think the Commanders are a very interesting team to watch as we get into the offseason, as we get ready for the draft, and definitely once we get closer to fantasy football drafts all the way there in September. So, guys, that will close out our very first episode of 2025. As mentioned at the top of the episode, if you enjoyed this episode without Tad, well, I'm sorry to say that this will be the final episode without Tad. He'll be coming back next week. If you missed Tad, then as mentioned, he'll be coming back next week. I'll be resuming all the shows with him again starting next week after he's taking care of stuff with his family there back in St. Louis. So we miss him. Definitely, we'll look forward to having more episodes with you. Fantasy football season is over, guys, but that doesn't mean that your fantasy management of your team ends right here. Maybe you're playing in a keeper league and you need some help as far as who are guys that you want to keep heading into 2025. We'll give you advice on that. If you play in a dynasty league where they're like our good friend Jason Davis, maybe you want some advice as far as how do I attack this year's rookie draft class and whether I need to make some trades as far as my roster to get draft picks or get some other players to shore my roster. We'll give you advice on that. But the only way that we can give you that help is you have to interact with us on our social media handles. You see the ticker that's coming right down below. You got us on Twitter. You got me at UnDecide23. You got Tad at TadDecide94. You got the show handle at The Decide Guys. And of course on Instagram at The Decide Guys as well. So hit us up. We want to know whether you won your fantasy championship, whether you unfortunately lost it. You had to suffer any punishments. We're here for you in support to make sure that, we want to see pictures of all those titles. We want to see some pictures of some punishments as well. But guys, like I said, the fantasy season just doesn't end, even though we are stopping with the fantasy coverage for now. We are still here to give you advice on everything when it comes to keeper leagues, dynasty leagues, whatever it is. If you're starting up a new league and need some advice, we can give you some help on that as well, guys. So yeah, please make sure you're interacting with us. We'll be starting to make our transition into NFL draft coverage. We'll have our NFL draft live stream like we've been doing for the past couple of years. That'll be coming at the beginning of February, if I remember correctly. I think it's February 1st is when the Senior Bowl is, so we'll be giving you that coverage as well. But yeah, we're going to be transitioning into NFL draft coverage, so we're going to be talking about a lot of these NFL draft college prospects. Who do we like at every position? We'll go through, teams that could use some help, what sort of strategies they'll be employing. So yeah, make sure you stay tuned to our podcast. We still got great content coming for you that will affect your 2025 NFL draft, your fantasy football draft strategies as well, guys, when it comes to these rookies as well. So please stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe or listen to your podcast. You're always up to date with our podcast episodes. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, so you're always up to date with our videos as well. And guys, can't stress this enough. Please make sure you're supporting our parent network at LAFB Network, because without them, there would be no us. Giving you a lot of great content when it comes to the Rams and the Chargers, both teams who made the playoffs. So they're giving you a lot of great postseason coverage for sure. Once we figure out their opponents after week 18 there. So yeah, they got like great NFL coverage. They got you covered college football as well with the Bruins and the Trojans at the college football level. But not only are they doing football anymore, guys, they got you covered when it comes to basketball. So they're giving you lots of great LA Clippers and LA Lakers coverage, as well as once the baseball season gets a little bit closer, they'll be giving you fantastic coverage when it comes to the Angels as well as the Los Angeles Dodgers. So, guys, lots of great content coming from a lot of great content producers, and, we appreciate each and every one of them. So please make sure you're supporting them, because as mentioned, if they didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. And we really appreciate everybody over there. Guys, I mean, as mentioned, there's a lot of great content on the way for you guys when it comes to the NFL draft. But yeah, please make sure you're interacting with us. Love to hear from all you guys. We love all the people at LAFB Network. We love all of you who are tuning into our podcast and our videos. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you watch. And please, guys, make sure you're supporting some of our favorite people. You got Chauncey Talese with LA Podfidential, giving you a lot of great pop culture stuff, as well as LA sports coverage. And of course, Al Rowe, good friend of the podcast as well. Salute to Troy is his podcast covering everything when it comes to the USC Trojans. But guys, we appreciate everybody who's tuning in, everybody who's subscribed to the podcast, who's watching the videos. I mean, just interact with us. I mean, just anything and everything that you're doing. We really just can't thank you enough. Happy New Year. Here's to a great 2025, and stay tuned for more episodes.